What if people love Shakespeare simply because they've been taught to? For centuries, Shakespeare has been worshipped as a literary giant. His works are studied, performed, and endlessly praised. But what if that praise is nothing more than an illusion? One of history's greatest philosophical writers, and undisputed literary genius himself, declared that the most celebrated playwright of the time was not just overrated, but a fraud. That genius was Leo Tolstoy, the man responsible for War and Peace and Anna Karenina. He spent years attacking Shakespeare. Did Tolstoy see something in Shakespeare that the rest of us refuse to admit? Today, we dive deep into one of the most heated literary debates in history: Tolstoy versus Shakespeare. Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, believed that great literature should uplift, enlighten, and make people better human beings. On the other hand, William Shakespeare belonged to a tradition where art was a beautiful mirror to nature, reflecting the good, the bad, and the ugly, without necessarily telling the audience what to think. Tolstoy was of the opinion that Shakespeare's works were empty, exaggerated, and worst of all, morally corrupt. In fact, he had an even bolder claim. People only praised Shakespeare because they had been taught to do so. In his view, Shakespeare's reputation was built more on tradition than actual literary merit. He went further to say that if Shakespeare's works had been published under a different name, people wouldn't consider them masterpieces at all. To prove his point, Tolstoy revisited Shakespeare's plays in his later years, reading them carefully to see if they still held up. His conclusion was that they were full of inconsistencies, forced dialogue, self-ambition, cruelty, and unnatural characters. He saw no real emotional depth, just a lot of poetic words thrown together to impress the audience. I remember the astonishment I felt when I first read Shakespeare. I expected to receive a powerful aesthetic pleasure, but having read one after another works regarded as his best, King Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Macbeth, not only did I feel no delight, but I felt an irresistible repulsion and tedium. Several times I read the dramas and the comedies and historical plays, and I invariably underwent the same feeling: repulsion, weariness, and bewilderment. At the present time, before writing this preface, being desirous once more to test myself, I have, as an old man of 75, again read the whole Shakespeare, including the historical plays, the Henrys, Troilus and Cressida, The Tempest, Cymbeline, and I have felt with even greater force the same feelings, this time, however, not of bewilderment, but of firm, indubitable conviction that the unquestionable glory of a great genius which Shakespeare enjoys, and which compels writers of our time to imitate him and readers and spectators to discover in him non-existent merits, thereby distorting their aesthetic and ethical understanding, is a great evil, as is every untruth. Take Othello, for example. The entire tragedy hinges on Othello being easily manipulated by Iago, who convinces him that his wife, Desdemona, is unfaithful. Tolstoy thought that this was ridiculous. Why would a great military leader be so foolish? It was a cheap trick, not real storytelling. Romeo and Juliet did not fare any better in Tolstoy's eyes. Though the whole world regards it as the ultimate love story, Tolstoy found it absurd, to put it mildly. He dismissed Romeo and Juliet's love as shallow and childish, a teenage infatuation blown out of proportion. In his view, real life does not involve people falling in love at first sight, marrying the next day, and dying for each other within a week. Perhaps the most absurd of them all for him was Hamlet. The prince spends the entire play brooding, plotting revenge, and driving himself and others mad. He kills innocent people along the way, including Polonius, whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what's the lesson at the end? Almost everyone dies, and nothing is truly resolved. Tolstoy saw this as chaos, not wisdom. In Tolstoy's famous essay, What is Art?, he argues that art should stir the conscious, awaken the spirit, and push humanity towards righteousness. A story without a moral purpose was like a lamp without oil, useless in the dark. And to him, Shakespeare's works were exactly that: beautiful, dramatic, but ultimately empty. Where was the lesson in Hamlet? What spiritual growth did Macbeth undergo? How did King Lear lead people towards goodness? In Tolstoy's novel, War and Peace, the characters did not wander aimlessly through life. They grew, learned, suffered, and ultimately found purpose. Pierre Bezukhov, the awkward lost nobleman, begins as a man swallowed by pleasure and wealth, but ends up discovering faith, wisdom, and peace. Prince Andrei, the hardened warrior, learns the futility of ambition and the power of love before his tragic end. Natasha Rostova, youthful and reckless, makes mistakes but finds redemption through love and family. The story painted a world where morality was like a steady lighthouse in a storm. Every lesson was there, every truth crystal clear. This, Tolstoy believed, was what art should do. It should take a person by the hand and lead them toward a higher purpose. It should fill their hearts, not just entertain their eyes. Another issue Tolstoy had with Shakespeare was the philosophical aspect of his works. Shakespeare's plays don't hand people a lesson on a silver platter. They don't tell audiences what to think or how to feel. Instead, they forced people to wrestle with questions without easy answers. Was Hamlet right to seek revenge? Did Macbeth deserve his fate? Was King Lear a fool or a victim? Shakespeare didn't answer these questions. He simply posed them, leaving audiences to decide for themselves. And Tolstoy saw this as a failure. He believed art wasn't meant to ask questions. It was meant to give answers. To sum it up plainly, Tolstoy wanted art to be a guiding light. Shakespeare created a labyrinth. Tolstoy wanted clarity. Shakespeare reveled in ambiguity. Tolstoy wanted art to save people. Shakespeare left them lost. And so, the great Russian writer turned his back on the bard, calling him overrated, immoral, and unworthy of his fame. But why did he despise Shakespeare so? Maybe the answers lie in the forces that shaped Tolstoy's mind. The thing is, Tolstoy was not always the man history remembers. He was once a reckless gambler, a drinker, a man consumed by worldly pleasures. But as the years passed, he felt the weight of life pressing down on him. The faces of war haunted his dreams. The cries of the poor echoed in his mind. He began to search for meaning beyond wealth, beyond fame, beyond the fleeting pleasures of literature that did not serve a higher purpose. And then came the great shift, a transformation. Like a man stumbling through darkness and suddenly struck by lightning, he had a spiritual awakening. He turned away from materialism, abandoned his noble title, rejected his past sins, and sought salvation in simplicity, faith, and moral clarity. He saw the world as a battleground between truth and deception, and that was when his eyes fell upon Shakespeare. Not as a young reader enthralled by stories of kings and lovers, but as a man who had seen too much of life's suffering. By the late 1800s, Tolstoy was no longer just a writer. He was a spiritual leader. He had abandoned the Orthodox Church and rejected its rituals, its dogma, and even its interpretation of Jesus. Instead, he created his own version of Christianity, one that focused entirely on moral purity, simplicity, and nonviolence. He believed the real message of Jesus had been corrupted by institutions seeking power. Followers gathered around him, treating his words as sacred wisdom. He lived like a peasant, renouncing his wealth and preaching a life of radical simplicity. To him, Shakespeare's works weren't just bad, they were dangerous. They distracted people from the real purpose of life, moral and spiritual awakening. But here's the irony. Tolstoy rejected Shakespeare for lacking a moral purpose. Yet, over a century later, Shakespeare's works are still studied, performed, and admired across the world. Meanwhile, Tolstoy's religious teachings have faded into obscurity. So, in the end, which one truly shaped the human spirit? For every voice that called Shakespeare immoral, 100 others cried out in his defense. Many writers argued that Shakespeare captured the human heart in all its confusion, its pain, and its glory. Yes, Hamlet was lost in doubt, but isn't that what makes him human? Yes, Macbeth was driven to madness, but isn't that a warning against unchecked ambition? Yes, Othello fell victim to jealousy, but don't we all wrestle with emotions beyond our control? Life itself is not a simple fable with a clear moral at the end. It is messy, complicated, and full of contradictions. And Shakespeare captured that messiness better than anyone before or since. Tolstoy's mistake was believing that all great art must do what he believed was good. But the truth is, art is not so linear as he believed it to be. Art, like the ocean, cannot be caged. No net is wide enough, no dam strong enough to contain its ever-changing tides. What speaks to one soul may bore another. What seems immoral to some may be the very lesson another needs. To say art must only serve morality is to demand the stars shine only in straight lines, that music play only in a single genre. Shakespeare understood that life does not always have a moral, that life is sometimes simply life. That is why even after half a millennium, Shakespeare is still a household name. This debate did not die with them. Even today, this debate is alive within every artist. When a director chooses between making a blockbuster that entertains or an indie film that challenges its audience, when a novelist decides whether to give their story a happy ending or leave it open-ended, they're facing the same choice Tolstoy and Shakespeare did. Should art comfort us or confront us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and explore more thought-provoking content on our channel. See you in the next video.